Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Kate Faulkner. I'm going to be chairing this debate today with my lovely guests, who I shall introduce shortly. So what we've done is we've put together a panel of experts. The idea of today is really so that we can inform you of all the stuff that's going on in the world of property. Because my word, it's busy out there. And you might, if you go on holiday, you're in all sorts of trouble. Because you could miss loads and you could be illegal by the time you get back. It's all very fast moving, and we might have Brexited, we might not. Let's just get that out of the way now. I don't mind which fence you sit on. So what we want to do, so we've split it up because there's various things happening. So we've got the letting side, which is being looked after by John Stewart, who works for the RLA, and by Richard Blanco, who works for the National Landlords Association. Now these guys, how many people are really happy landlords at the moment? A few. That's nice. Do you think you're being slightly unfairly treated, though? Let's have a bit of, yeah. Well, these are the two guys who are looking after you. So they're the guys that are working very, very hard on your behalf. Over and above that, all enjoy paying tax? You're a very nice audience, I have to say. So tax, I think when I started, when Nick and I were doing this show, it was a first-time buyer show, so it was totally irrelevant for everybody here. But then suddenly we talked about property investment, and nobody really worried about tax, did they? Because prices were going up so much, you cared. Whereas now taxes can kind of make or break an investment, and it is, you know, if you're going into property, it is so important. You've got to understand what that tax, what's going to happen to your tax bill at the end of that before you do anything. So I've asked Tony to come and talk about it, because it is probably, in my experience, the thing you're worst at. Okay, so if you don't take tax advice, we've got Tony in here to help you. Based on the number of questions that I get on LBC 5 Live and through my website, you seem to think I can answer your tax questions, and I can't. Okay, I can give you some hints and tips, but that's about it. And then over and above that, Matt Pryor has kindly joined us from MHCLG. Now, sit down, relax. I know Matt works for the government, but he has had nothing to do with lettings policy whatsoever. So leave him alone. That's what John and Richard are here for. They're to talk about that. But Matt and I have been working very closely. Last year, I don't know if you're aware, but the government, or even actually the year before that, the government launched a massive change of ideas, the way that we buy and sell homes. So what I thought would be really fantastic is firstly for you to hear from Matt about some of the work and some of the thinking of the government. But secondly, you buy lots of houses. And yes, sell lots of houses. So I would love you to feed back your thoughts on those ideas, or if you've got another bright idea, tell us. Because I promise you, you cannot sit in this room quietly. Okay, so there's no not asking questions. We do not want the 5 of us talking all of this time. So what I've asked them to do to start off with, though, is just do a little 2-minute or 5-minute chat with a couple of slides to go through the issues that you need to be aware of. And I'm going to invite Richard to come up and have a chat about impact of government changes, but nothing to do with Matt, remember that.
I'm one of the London representatives for the National Landlords Association. I'm also a landlord in my own right of properties across 6 London boroughs, so I'm dealing with all the kind of stuff that you'll be dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And just in this couple of slides, I'm just going to talk about the impact of government changes and also what I see as the key challenges, both in my role at the NLA and also as a landlord myself. So first thing to say is that in many ways the policy is working. The government wanted to slam the brakes on buy-to-let lending, I think, by the sort of triple whammy of the tax changes and the PRA changes, and also the 3% stamp duty change. 23% of landlords tell us that they intend to sell some of their properties in the next 12 months. And we know that buy-to-let lending has fallen, and there's been an increase in first-time buyer borrowings. So the last stats I could find, or last stats I remember that were memorable from last summer, were that first-time borrowing was up by around about 8%, and buy-to-let lending was down by about 9.8%, or 22% in actual amounts of lending. And I think also the level of regulation is starting to deter both old and new landlords. So we used to get 100,000 new people coming into the business every year, and I think that has certainly declined. That's anecdotally, really. I can't give you any stats on that. But the number of landlords that have been around for many years, and I've been a rep now for about 8 or 9 years, that come up to me at landlord meetings and say, I've had enough, I want to throw in the towel. I do hear that increasingly more now, because it's not, you can't exit quickly, so they have to think long and hard about how they're going to do that. But sadly, I think we are seeing a bit more of that. On the horizon, well, I think that some of the impacts it's going to have, the evidence suggests that bigger landlords still want to expand. And 15% of landlords say they're wanting to buy more properties within the next 12 months. And all of our research seems to suggest that's landlords with 4 or more properties. And certainly you see the likes of Granger and so on having a field day, really, picking up those properties that smaller landlords are selling. I think we're definitely going to see a consolidation in the letting agent sector because of the letting agent reform that's going through. It's just the tenant fees ban and client money protection at the moment, isn't it, that's come in, and things like the redress scheme and so on. But the working group, which will report in July, will probably recommend trade body membership and compulsory qualifications and so on. So I think we're definitely going to see a thinning out of the smaller agents and the larger agents kind of taking more control. We're definitely seeing shifting tectonic plates in financing. I've just taken out a mortgage for a property I've just bought, and it was fascinating to see how the sector's changed so much. So many more kind of limited company products around, how all the different stress tests are applied depending on what tax band you fall into. So it really has diversified, and there are some positives there, I think. The government definitely wants this sort of professionalisation, and that's what's behind this kind of tsunami, really, of regulation that we're seeing. And I wonder if we're heading towards a national register. If you think about it, we're the only country now in Great Britain that doesn't have one, because Scotland and Wales has a national register now. And, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said I do not want a national register. But now, given the number of licensing schemes that we have in London, I would much rather have a national register and for those dreadful bureaucratic licensing schemes to be abolished. So if it were a light touch one, £35 to be given a card and registration that you can lose if you behave badly, then I would be in favour of that. And we definitely seem to be seeing a shift towards the perceived needs of tenants, and governments certainly casting tenants as consumers and wanting to kind of consumerise them and make life better for them as consumers. My main worry is that we may end up with compulsory 3-year tenancies. Certainly Shelter and all of the housing charities have been desperate to try and force that on us, and I just hope that the government doesn't go down that route. I saw the housing minister speak at the Arla conference last week, and she said we'd be getting a result on the consultation the next month or so we'll see what happens. So key challenges now as a landlord, I'm sure my fellow panellists will cover this. Obviously deciding on what structure to have to mitigate against tax increases. I think these changes, of course, we're into year 3 now in this tax year of the 4-year transitionary period into Section 24, which is where we can't claim back tax relief on all of our finance charges. I think that's here for a generation. I know people campaigning against it look to Ireland and say, well, Ireland have repealed their Section 24 similar type changes. But I think they're very clever the way politicians do this. It's very technical. Not many people understand it if you're not in the business. The public's not going to go for new perks for landlords, because that's how it will be seen if they row back on it. So politically it's quite difficult. But I think we may see some changes on stamp duty. If you remember, it was totally restructured in December 2014 when it became a lot less lower down, but once you were above sort of £1 million, the stamp duty you paid was a lot and too much, and it's really slowed down the prime central London area, which has a knock-on effect. I think we might see some shift on that. Certainly old business models, I think, are expiring. So that idea that you would finance a property, you would buy a wreck, refinance it and use that money to buy more, you can't do anymore. So cash is king. For those of us that haven't got cash, It's harder to get finance. I think lenders increasingly are more knowledgeable. I've just taken out a mortgage from one of the specialists, Precise, but they can also be more controlling as a result, I think. A big issue for us is managing anger, frustration and disillusionment. And certainly our index of optimism in the sector is at a record low. So we are all pretty miserable, and I'm sure you're aware of that. And what's driving that is poorly conceived and over-wrapping regulation. I'm running out of time, so I'll just say my last four. I think, we're having to chase yield now. Some of us are doing short lets, but not many of us. We may have to improve property standards to compete, particularly with build to rent, although it's only small still. We need to get higher rents, of course, to try and keep those yields up, but that's going to be harder to achieve with reduced migration if Brexit happens. And also, we continue to see landlords not wanting to let to tenants on benefits. Just 7% of landlords in London now let to tenants on benefits because of the high likelihood of arrears.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. A round of applause for that, for flying through the end of it.
I want to run through some of the issues that we're going to face round about regulation, enforcement standards and particularly justice reform. Now let's get stuck right into the meat of things. The future of Section 21. I sincerely believe that within 3 years, Section 21 will be gone. There's huge pressure coming in from the tenant organisations, from local authorities, from think tanks, not all of them left-wing either. So I do think that we ought to be thinking about and preparing ourselves for life after Section 21 and have a look about what replaces that. We've seen the Scottish equivalent go, and that's been linked to a whole package of justice reforms there, where we've seen a specialist housing tribunal that handles all cases. We've seen 18 grounds introduced. Possession must be based on grounds. There's been some positives come out of Scotland. However, the arrears-based ground has been toughened up a little and is actually working faster and quicker, and certainly a lot faster and quicker than Section 8 in England. That might be due to the private rented sector being smaller in Scotland as well. But our colleagues in Scotland, the Scottish Association of Landlords, are not quite as horrified with the outcome of reforms in Scotland as they thought they might be. But I do think that we can see the writing on the wall for Section 21. We have a whole pile of restrictions have been placed in it, from the retaliatory eviction and improvement notice restrictions, the 4-month service restriction, the 6-month use it or lose it restriction, the prescribed information that's been added to, and most of this from a Conservative government. It sends a message about what they think of Section 21, and they don't really like it. The only thing that's probably saving it is trying to keep private landlords in the market. There's going to be future restrictions. You're going to be restricted if you've charged unlawful fees under the tenant fee ban. I've no doubt that your electrical safety certificates will be added to that prescribed information, and I've no doubt that membership of a redress scheme, when it comes in for landlords, will also be a block on using Section 21 if you're not a member. So just to hit you with a punch in the gut, I suppose, I think Section 21 is in the way out. That brings us on to Section 8 reform. If Section 21 is on the way out, then Section 8 really needs to be reformed. We have to, like Scotland, get it absolutely right. We need to make sure that there are new grounds in there. For example, in wanting to sell a property, to move into a property to live in, you're a family member. The sorts of reasons that landlords currently use Section 21 for, but aren't covered in the Section 8 grounds. And also those Section 8 grounds that landlords find difficult and lengthy and time-consuming and expensive, so use Section 21 instead. Example, the arrears needs to be improved and streamlined and made faster. And the antisocial behaviour route to eviction, we need to find a manageable way of doing that that doesn't require witness statements from neighbours and what have you, and an unmanageable burden of proof. So if Section 21 is a way out, it's absolutely key we get reforms to Section 8 and we get them absolutely right. And that has to be tied up in a package of wider justice reform. We would like to see a specialist housing court. The government have consulted on that. It would pull together the split routes to justice that are there at the moment. Some things been heard in the county court, some things through tribunal. Pull it all together in one place, a bit like Scotland. It would be better resourced and it would speed up access to justice, but both landlords and tenants, because at the end of the day, the justice system isn't working particularly well for tenants, which is why we're seeing attacks on things like Section 21 and we're seeing things like redress schemes. And of course, the government have committed themselves to mandatory redress scheme membership. It's going to be interesting to see how they manage that. They struggled a little bit with agents. There's only around 20 to 25,000 agents practices in England. There's over 2 million landlords. I think it's one thing to run a redress scheme for 20,000 members. It's a completely different thing to try and run something on a mandatory basis for over 2 million people. I think it's a bit of a stretch and a bit of a big ask, but the government do seem committed to it. Look a little bit at some of the things that are coming our way in terms of standards and regulation. We know that the electrical safety requirements that currently apply to HMOs are going to come forward for all private rented properties. I think we're going to see some reforms to fire safety post-Grenfell. We've seen the building regs review and the like applying to complex and high buildings. I think there does need to be some reform around about HMO properties and things like that. The process needs to be simplified, and again, we need to get rid of the split responsibilities between local authorities and fire authorities so that landlords can be confident they're doing the right thing by their tenant safety. Minimum energy efficiency standards, this is going to be huge. The government have committed to a stretch target of a minimum EPC rating of C by 2030 as part of climate change commitments, etc. We had the Energy Act in 2011 introduced the minimum standard of E. That came into force last year. E is relatively simple for most properties to be brought up to. The properties that are still F and G tend to be the more expensive, older, harder to fit out properties. C, however, is a huge stretch, and that they're expecting that at the moment, it looks like, to be done over a shorter time scale and with much less funding available, and for much more difficult measures in terms of cost and installation. So I think that is, again, a big stretch by government. There's talk of the property MOT. Will that be linked to the new fitness for habitation standards? Also linked to the housing health and safety rating system review that's underway. We have a selective licensing review that's underway. I hate to disappoint you, but I think it's incredibly unlikely that we'll get rid of selective licensing. And as Richard mentioned, we're likely to get a landlord or a property or a tenancy or an all three register coming forward at some time. And I don't think that's going to be instead of selective licensing. Sadly, I think that will be to work with selective licensing. I like being the voice of gloom.
We're all doomed. I think you missed that out. Brilliant. Tony, so you can cheer everybody up on the tax front now.
All right, so if any of you have been at one of our gigs before or were in the previous seminar, we'll just quickly talk about the main tax changes. Actually, before we do that, don't worry about all this sort of stuff. Governments generally don't seek to regulate and tax failing sectors. Why would you? Right? So we are successful, and there's a price to pay for success. But if you do things the right way and actually look at things from the tenant's perspective, and I've been a tenant in my time, to have good regulated, well-maintained property isn't such a bad thing. And with rental being the second biggest tenure after buying, well, actually it's incumbent upon us, to have good sustainable housing. It's part of being human, provide good places for people to live, good environments, and actually people get social mobility. So work with it, and we can influence it. So let's have a look at these main tax changes. Well, stamp duty, yeah, it's here to stay, suck it up. What comes around goes around. It pays for wars, fights the French, justified or not. That's just the way society works. Expenses, why are you making losses? If you're in a business, don't make losses, but you can only claim your expenses in the current year. You can't run them forward. It's silly. 10% CGT surcharge on investment assets. You've just been mugged. Sorry, but suddenly you're rich, so the government wants to put its hands in your pocket. You just got to live with it, but there are ways that you can offset it in the right structures. And then Section 24. You really think it was Comrade Corbyn who introduced that one, and not Gorgeous George. Yeah, I suppose you can tell it was a blue tie as opposed to a red tie, being a slightly cooler colour. It takes time to warm up, so he gave us 4 years to get used to it. But it only affects higher rate taxpayers or those who are going to be, because it caps the relief at basic rate. If you turn the clock back to the 70s, basic rate was about 90%, or is that the wrong political broadcast? Sorry. But there are ways that you can offset it, and incorporation sure as hell isn't one of them. And then finally, on that point, Section 162 incorporation relief, the ability to not have to pay capital gains tax and stamp duty on incorporating an otherwise personally held portfolio. You can't get it cleared in advance. And if I were a Chancellor of the Exchequer, apart from declaring us out of the EU, having 0 tariffs and a 10% corporation tax, sorry, I can't help it, I did vote to leave. I would be saying...
We're not going to be debating that, I assure you.
Oh, no, no, exactly, we're not. We are leaving, end off. Yeah? Thank you for the opportunity. We'll do the radio show later, shall we? All right. And don't vote for UKIP. They're racist buggers. Sorry. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. That's what we do quickly. All right. So we'll come back to that later. Move on. Right. So what is the cost of doing nothing? You have to do something. You can't stick your head in the sand. Section 24 will come and bite you. So let's just take a pretty average portfolio. 160 grand in rental income, but a mortgage interest, bit of expenses, but no PAYE. Well, the red line, if you do nothing over that period of time, Section 24 has cost you 100 grand. That's a lot of money. Probably, 10 holidays in the Caribbean. Really fast car. Load of faster women. So I'm not talking about politics again, am I? No, okay. Wrong show. Yeah? And more to the point, it's cost your shareholders, your kids, their future. Compare that, if you take advice, you're in a different position. So if you just look at those, Section 24 means alone you have to take advice from people who know what they're talking about. Most accountants are just that, reactive, backward-looking, non-specialist accountants. That's why you're at this kind of show. So you have to talk to people who understand it, otherwise you'll be worse off, not better. And then, stamp duty. Stamp duty in land tax and CGT. It is complex, hugely complex. Most professionals don't understand it, let alone the layperson. So let's just have a look. How do you work out what my stamp duty uplift is? Well, you've got all of those points. Are you replacing your main residence? Is it a second property? Is it being bought by a corporate body? And so on and so on and so on. All of those things will affect how much stamp duty you will have to pay. And then you get on to the 10% CGT surcharge for investment assets, i.e. bricks and mortar. Well, HMRC's self-assessment toolkit runs to 32 pages. I can service a car with that many tools. If it's a Land Rover, I actually only need 2 tools, a spanner and a hammer. Right? And then, what do you buy it for? How much have you spent? Was it your home? Who owns it? Or is it being classed as high value and starts falling under ATED? So, how do you work out CGT? Tax has got complex. We don't have a unified tax system. So whatever you do, admit you don't know what you don't know, and the only thing you should buy from a professional is that which they know and you don't. Don't instruct them. Get inside their head and work out where you are now, what you want to achieve, and how to reverse engineer it to minimise the tax in order to maximise your returns on your investment. Don't go it alone.
Well, thank you very much, Tony.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Right, fact, and Matt is going to cheer you up because he's got some exciting new things happening, haven't you, Matt?
Bit of a change of pace. I'm here to talk about home buying and selling, and I haven't got any slides, so I'll apologise in advance. There's nothing exciting going on over here. Before we start, I just want you to cast your mind back to 2017, a period of time when Brexit looked very achievable and the government held an election, and as part of that manifesto they committed to improving the home buying and selling process. What we said is we want to make it quicker, cheaper and less stressful, and I've been kind of leading that work over the last couple of years. I think it's worth reflecting on the kind of process it stands at the moment. One of the interesting things is it's not really broken, or it's not broken enough for the system to kind of correct itself. So, everybody in this room will tell you buying and selling houses is a bit of a nightmare, but we managed collectively to sell 1 million a year. So, this is a process that there are 1 million transactions a year. So it's not great, but we kind of muddle through. Some kind of key statistics to ponder. People now move on average about once every 19 years. Now, obviously, you guys in this room, much more experienced than that, but this is essentially a process that consumers aren't particularly familiar with. The idea that people moved every 7 years or staircased up through properties just doesn't seem to happen anymore. And if you look on your street, you'll see the rise of people getting extensions, loft conversions, this idea that you kind of grow out of your house and buy a bigger one. There's much more now about improving the house you're in. And part of the reasons, things people have talked about, stamp duty is a big barrier to kind of people moving houses. Added to that, there was some survey information from Rick. It takes around 19 weeks to sell your house. So that means if you went into the estate agent today and say, right, I want to put my house on the market, you're probably looking to move around the 23rd of August. That's quite a long time, and probably longer than the estate agent told you. So it takes, and apparently in the southeast at the moment, according to Rick's, it's about 21 and a half weeks. So that's a long time to put your life on hold. And that's the reason why we've put this commitment together, to make a kind of quicker, cheaper and less stressful process. And my kind of, or the driving thought behind it is that if we can make the process quicker, then kind of cheaper and less stressful will follow. So what do we know about the process now? Well, we know basically that somewhere between a quarter and a third of all transactions fail. And that, we think, costs consumers around £270 million a year in things like searches and surveys they commission. So that's a huge wastage. So when we talk about making the process cheaper, we're really focused in on bringing that bit of wastage down. And why is that? So essentially, it's basically driven by the fact that people have to hold their nerve for such a long time. So as I'm sure you guys know here, if you go and make an offer to buy a house, there's lots of excitement at the outset. You find a property, you look at it, you put in an offer, the offer's accepted, you then got to get a conveyancer, the conveyancer might commission searches, and then nothing seems to happen for a long time. And then there's this rush around kind of exchange and a rush to complete, but there's a long period in the middle where you just don't know what's going on. And what we do know is that because that period takes such a long time, and because people aren't generally expecting it, they think they're going to move in the 10 or 12 weeks that their estate agent told them, there's this suspicion, there's this thought, well, there must be something wrong with the property. Nobody's told me. Or the other side's pulled out. And we know that this is a process where neither party trusts each other. So both sides think the other side's cheating on them. So if you're a seller, you think, well, the buyer's put in multiple offers and they're just not telling me, and that's why nothing's happening here. And if you're a buyer, you think, well, the seller's just continuing to market their property. They're doing this, but they're going to get a higher offer. And then you've got this whole issue of chain assembly. So one of the unique features of the UK property market is that we buy and sell together. So we tend to have chains. There's no use of bridging finance, really. So in other countries, what you would do is you would sell your house and then you would buy another one. In this country, you're tied together, and therefore you have to wait for the chain to assemble. And that takes time. And that's one of the reasons why it takes so long. So anyway, we launched a call for evidence back in 2017, and we said to people, give us your ideas about ways in which the process can be improved. And we got loads of them, and I'm really grateful for anyone who took the time to fill in my consultation. I'll apologise for the length of it, but hey, I wanted to get all the ideas possible. So we've come up with a few things. The first thing we're doing, and I'm immensely grateful to Kate, because Kate has helped me set up a home buying and selling group, is for the first time we've brought together a forum where all of the industries involved in buying and selling come together. So we've literally got people all the way from estate agents through to removal firms, and for the first time we've got them into a room and said, right, well, let's look at this process from end to end. Because as Kate will tell you, if you talk to estate agents, they'll tell you it's the conveyancers' fault. If you talk to the conveyancers, they'll tell you, well, the estate agents aren't helping in the process here. And what you need to do is bring them into a room. And so we're doing that, and we've used a home buying and selling group to start those conversations around kind of handoffs and how can we work together to make the process better. In addition, we're developing how to buy and how to sell guides, which will be published in the next couple of months. And that's about educating consumers, because consumers just don't understand the process. You know, if you last did something 19 years ago, you really aren't going to remember it. And what government wants in all of this is we want what's known as serious buyers and serious sellers. So if you're a buyer, we want you to have got a decision in principle. We want you to know how much money you can borrow. If you're a seller, we want you to get as much information about that property out to purchasers before they make their decision to purchase. Because we know, for example, that if you're going to buy a leasehold property and the condition of the lease says that you can't have a liveried van on the drive, then that will stop some people buying. So we want information up front. One of the big things we want to do is reservation agreements. We think one of the ways to increase commitment is for buyers and sellers to put down a small amount of money to kind of lock themselves into the sale. Could be £1,000, could be a percentage of the property. Essentially, we're going to trial that later on this year using some behavioural insight research. We also, as was mentioned earlier, we're looking at regulating property agents. So we're going to probably require estate agents to have a professional qualification. We think that's an important part of the sector. That may well lead to things like licensing. We don't know yet, but that's one of the things that we've asked Lord Best to look at. We are also, one of the reasons we know that it takes a long time to buy and sell a leasehold property. So what we're doing is we are ending the situation where freeholders and managing agents can take as long as they like and charge as much as they like for providing that information. We are going to set a fee and a timescale for turning that information around, because we know if there's a leasehold property anywhere in the chain, it takes much longer than if there's all freehold. And we're also speeding up local authority searches. So we've set a 10-day turnaround target time, and I'm pleased to say that typically local authority, 80 to 90% of local authorities are now turning around searches within 10 days. So that's a very quick flavour of some of the things we've got involved, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Matt. So there's some good news. That's nice, isn't it? So I'm going to start with questions now, so keep them rolling.
What I was keen to understand is really, with the abolition of Section 21, are we not in a situation now where we're going back to a sort of more like a pre-1976 letting environment, where you've really got regulated tenancies and you don't have the freedom to run your business without government interference?
So the question's to John and Richard, I think. So it's about Section 21. If that goes, will we go back to regulated tenancy type environment?
Depends what the model is, doesn't it? I mean, maybe we go back to a kind of assured tenancy model, which is the kind of, although they're not called that in Scotland, I forget the private residential tenancies, I think they're called. So basically, the tenant would really have the right to live there for life, and the only way you could evict them is through a Section 8 process. But the what John was suggesting was that Section 8 would be reviewed, and we'd have more reasons to evict. So it might be you moving in or you selling the property and so on. That is what we'd go back to, if you like. And I think it would be a huge backward step myself. And I'm not quite as pessimistic as John about this, maybe because I don't have as much contact with government as he does. There you go. I mean, I think, if I could just say, I think the Section 21 is hugely important for the flexibility of the market, and the vast majority of landlords use Section 21 responsibly. It's only a small minority that don't, and also, something like 90% of tenancies are ended by the tenant. So we really do not need Section 21 to be taken away.
Yeah. Well, can I just ask a related question to that? Was one of the kind of corollaries to that legislative move is to look at some kind of rent controls, and I think Labour are quite up for that. And there's been a traditional, there's been a traditional resistance from the private rent sector about having rent regulation. But I mean, in the commercial sector, you have rent reviews baked into people's contracts, and it doesn't cause chaos and destruction and the apocalypse. And I, as a landlord, would be quite happy to have my rents regulated, because I think you can be abusive and put rents up because you...
Yeah, but it's the difference...
Hold on. So the second question was about rent regulation. And I actually agree with you. The weird thing is, if you look at housing associations, they've been regulated for ages. And between 2018 and 2013, housing association rents went up by 21%. Private tenancies went up by 7%. Because at the moment, they go up in line with wages, whereas housing association goes up in line with social housing. So as long as it is linked to inflation, it's not actually a bad thing, except I just think a lot of people don't like the restriction.
Yeah, it's the two often go hand in hand, and it's clear to understand what we're talking about. If you had things like rent caps, I think that would be pretty disastrous. If you get some form of rent regulation, then it could work, but again, there is a natural resistance, I think, to that. But if it had been set at the rate of inflation, or rate of inflation plus 1 or 2% over the last few years, then to be honest, very few landlords have increased rent above that. I think the danger with rent controls is actually they almost set a target for landlords. You could say, well, but the government says I've got to put my rents up by inflation plus 1%. So, you know, they could actually potentially be counterproductive. But I just see a swell of support for the removal of Section 21. It's happening because we're seeing more families in the sector. It's happening because we're seeing older people in the sector who are looking for longer term security. And I without being too pessimistic, I just cannot see. And if we're saying that landlords aren't evicting without good reason, if they're using Section 21 for arrears and for antisocial behaviour and reasons like that, well, if we can get the Section 8 process right, would Section 21 be needed anyway, I suppose, is the question, particularly if you get the other grounds in. But it's not something we support. We do think that there are certainly dangers to the supply side, but I'm not naturally an optimist.
But I actually think what will happen, I don't think it'll make a blind bit of difference to the tenant at all. Because when you talk to, we do a survey for Belvoir, and the only reason they ever evict anybody, a decent agent will evict them, will be because they sell.
The evidence from Scotland is showing that it is giving tenants the confidence to complain. It used to be the balance in tribunals has traditionally been about 80%, 90% landlord-led complaints, about 10 or 20% tenant-led complaints. And that was true in Scotland as well. Since the new tribunal was introduced, new tenancy, and they abolished Section 33, I think it was in Scotland, that balance has flipped. 80% of complaints are now being brought by tenants.
Just to mention with rent stabilisation, the issue around that is new is that Sadiq Khan has for the first time said that he wants to, put an overall cap on rents to suppress rents in London, and that's most economists say that it would be disastrous for the rental market and indeed for the housing economy in general. So.
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop there because I want to get through all the
question for Tony. This surcharge, the CGT surcharge, when did it or when is it going to come into effect?
It's already come into effect with George Osborne when he effectively said, if you're selling property assets, which are not your principal private residence, and you're a higher rate taxpayer, you're paying 28% capital gains tax.
You're not going to feel it because they reduced it for every other asset. So effectively, you're not paying any more than you would. But if you invested in another asset, you'd be paying 18 or 8%.
I was aware of it. I haven't seen it quite like that.
Yeah.
So,
Slightly different description.
It's just how I express it for dramatic purposes.
Yes. And it works.
Tony,
What measures are being put in place to protect good landlords from rogue tenants?
Well, probably not enough, most landlords feel, I think. I mean, there's this whole business of having a database that collects data on rogue tenants, but and there are some organisations, a tenants history and some like that will collect that. But generally, the only way we know who the rogue tenants are through anecdotal evidence that landlord action organisations like that have got. Now, it's something I raise with local authorities a lot because they're always talking about training landlords, and we need to encourage more local authorities to train tenants as well, I think. So it's certainly something that's not on the agenda that probably should be, I think.
Yeah. There's been some talk of potentially an accredited tenant scheme, where, but it's actually one of those things where if you got things like rental history feeding into credit ratings and the like,
positive,
or you got some sort of tenant passport up and running that allowed deposit transfer, carried references and things. It's not so much getting a register of rogue tenants, but it is at least giving you confidence about who the good tenants are.
And that's actually coming because the problem tenants have is that they their rental money that they pay you, and the fact they pay you every single month, does not go towards any lending criteria at all. So they're paying all this money, and they'll have paid you maybe £1,200 a month, but then they're rejected for an £800 mortgage. And that's really unfair. So I think Nationwide have launched the first one where they will start taking it into consideration, and the tenant passport and everything is coming through.
Experian credit file now, which I do a lot, there is now a section on rent.
Yes.
I mean, I don't pay rent, so I don't have any data in there, but some tenants will start to have data.
But it's quite important to have a fair and balanced system to look at both sides.
It is, but on the other hand, you're making the choice to take that tenant or not. You're running it as a business. So just like if I provide services to somebody, if they go bust, they go bust. And do you know what I mean? Whereas from the tenant's perspective, it's harder for them to do those checks, I think, on you. So I understand what you're saying, but if you've put in good practices, you're unlikely to get a poor tenant. But I also think just general technology and the way that credit and identity checks are being improved will help.
You make a valid point, but I do know quite a few good landlords who do have good practices in place, but do come across tenants who get into arrears, sometimes even intentionally, and then just move on. And there's very little recourse.
And there needs to be a reporting system on that. Yeah, we understand that. Yes.
A question to the gentleman on the end
Matt.
there. Matt.
Lovely, Matt.
You mentioned wanting to introduce some sort of DIP for when people want to buy, and then you also mentioned some sort of home buyers report. Is that bringing back?
We're not. Don't.
I asked the question because that was the impression I got when you mentioned it.
Matt is banned from saying hips. We can't say that at all.
So what are you calling it? Under what guise are you intending to bring it back?
We can tell you a little bit more about it,
We're
Matt.
not, on the first one, decision in principle. So essentially, we are one of the things we're very keen to encourage is that the buyers think about how much they can borrow in advance, and that when they go then to view a property, they can actually evidence that they can actually afford it, because there's nothing more frustrating than showing people around and then discovering that you can't actually buy it, because you're locking people in, and it's as I said before, it's a 20-week process. You don't want to find a couple of weeks in actually that buyer isn't good for it. When I talked about what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage people to provide as much information up front. We don't think HIPs were the answer. Obviously, the government has already said that they aren't being introduced. But what we do is we want people to think about the information they already own. And one of the concepts that we're developing along with Kate's group is this concept of a property logbook. So it's quite a weird process at the moment where you assemble a completely perfect set of information about a property, and then you effectively throw it away once you've bought it and allow the next person to assemble it. We think some of the information that relates to a property should just be kept and stored and then produced the next time that someone wants to come and buy it. And so that's one of the things we're doing, and we're talking to various companies around this, and we're trying to get this concept that we should basically make use of information and say, well, actually, things like I've taken out chance of liability insurance. If you're in a chance of liability area, the chances are that your surveyor or your conveyancer will identify that, and you'll put in a property, you'll indemnify yourself against that through insurance. But the next buyer will do the same because they can't find the copy of the policy. So essentially, even though it runs for the lifetime of the property, each buyer is having to get that thing again. So it makes much more sense to have information that relates solely to a property to be kept with the property and then handed over. And if you talk to some companies out there, what they're saying is you're already getting to the point where your property has a digital identity. So things like smart locks, the Nest heating system, basically there are certain bits of information you need to transfer over anyway. We're just saying, well, why not, if you've got building consent, if you've got building certificates, if you've got your fence certificates, just lump that all together and then hand it over.
And what we're looking at with the upfront information is actually twofold. So what we've done is, if you, as a seller, fill out all the information for the agent, for them to abide by all their rules and regulations that they have, for the broker, for the legal company, it's 28 pages. And quite a lot of that is repeated. What we've done is reduce that down. I know it's still 14, but at least if you start that just as you're putting on your property on the market, there's a chance that you don't have to try and do that. And if you're buying and selling at the same time, that's a bit of a nightmare if you've got two lots of that. So we're doing that. And then the second thing, both on the lettings and on the sales side, is we're saying, well, actually, if the letting sector, what they want is a safe, legally let property, and they want to give the tenant and the local authority reassurance. So we're reckoning the property MOT that John recommended. We've got a sheet now that we've been working on for quite some time that actually says, don't just regulate the agents to the government, it says regulate the property too. So it's signed off, and no tenant will ever have to take a property as long as it's a property MOT that isn't legally and safely let. And they know instantly you're a good landlord, whether you're letting through an agent or somebody else. And then so we've now started to produce already a property logbook for lettings. And then what we're doing is we're going, right, well, the guys who are producing the property logbook for home buying and selling, why don't you talk to the guys that are looking at the property MOT, and you techie people out there, why don't you see if you can do this so that you don't end up with 15 different systems? Because that's what tends to happen at this time. So we're trying to look at saying, look, it's not about just regulating landlords, it's not about trying to get all this information in sellers and buyers, but actually we've got to regulate our properties as well to deliver for the way that people use them in today's market. But the fact is, as Matt said, it's been brilliant to actually get everybody to work together. And I genuinely can't tell you, we've never had that before. Not when they get on, anyway. So we are trying to work. And I hope, do you think that's a good idea? Does that work for you? And put your hands up. Who would prefer? No, well, how do I ask this? So, who likes property licensing? You like? Wow, that's impressive, actually.
Don't like the cost.
You don't like the cost? No, I've been writing about that. So, if you had a choice of property licensing or just producing a property MOT, which would you prefer to produce a property MOT? Just one sheet of paper? Does that make sense?
Okay, because who's going to do the assessment? For property.
So there's people out there doing it already every single day of the week.
If it means every door has to be fire door, then no, because in some properties there shouldn't be fire doors.
No, it's nothing like that. Have you not seen the sheet?
But what I'm saying is, I am in favour of property MOTs, but we need to get into the detail and be sure that it's a
one-pager, and all it's doing is drawing all the information that you need, and it's making you sign to say yes, you've got it. Yes, sir.
Can we get a copy of that?
You probably won't at the moment, if I need to be honest about that, because it's still in test. It's a long list of people we have to check it with, so we get in there. But as soon as it is, there is the Lettings Industry Council website you can go onto, in the Home Buying and Selling Group website, and I'll put those on property checklists for you. Sorry, I have a quick question here, and then these two here.
Yeah, I was saying, I think that perhaps landlords often get bogged down in the bureaucracy and the burden of the licensing, but the thing is that we're all affected by people who are letting out properties and not paying taxes. They've got vacant sheds, and the way I look at it is licensing, if it's properly done and regulated, is a good way of clearing out the roads in the system.
Okay.
Just showing that all the licensing should really be doing is saying, yes, I have this property and I'm responsible for letting it out. That should all it be, all it is, and then the council know who the landlords are. And if you're not licensed, then the assumption is that you're doing it illegally for a reason, because you're not meeting safety standards, you're not declaring your income, and those are the people that we should all be trying to.
I think the issue is that where licensing has had a lot of investment in, what we're really not seeing is huge numbers of people being done for it. It's tiny. The numbers are tiny, and it's a very expensive way of doing stuff.
Good landlords end up paying, and the bad landlords don't. And what I'd like to see is a £40 registration system or something like that. That's much more light touch than this bureaucratic licensing that is far too expensive. Often local authorities not properly trained in doing the inspections and so on, and
almost an expensive way. One of the things I am learning doing the work we're doing is that we're not necessarily, as an industry, sitting back and thinking, well, who should be doing this job? So, for example, when Tony was talking about the tax side, one of the implications of the stamp duty changes is that suddenly legal companies have got to become tax experts. Now, before this change, I could advise on stamp duty. I will walk away from doing it now because it is 30 pages long, and because I don't deal with it every day, I don't know. And actually, what we should have done introducing that new stamp duty was said, actually, we should probably be passing this over to tax people. It's unfair to ask the legal profession to do this. And it's a potentially expensive way of doing it. And now they're being investigated by HMRC, which they're not trained to do. Tony, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think that there's an overriding point here. On the one hand, we want to be taxed as businesses, have all the advantages of businesses. On the other hand, we're complaining about not doing all the things that every other professional sector would want to do. You can't practice as a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a dentist, a financial advisor, unless you've got the right insurances, the right professional standards, the right tools for the trade. So if we're going to stop being accidental landlords as a sector, and we're going to have, if you like, different classes of tenants, social housing, or people who simply want to rent as opposed to buy, then we can't moan about it if we're not prepared, to work with regulators, work with the trade bodies, to put in place a system whereby everybody knows what you see is what you get. I am a professional landlord. Keep me in here. Don't get me out of here. Do it right, And all of these things go away. And just one quick point. It's all well and good having outcomes-based regulation, yeah, but it's a cop-out by government. We've seen it in law, we've seen it in financial services. You know, it leaves it open for people to make up the rules as they go or interpret them the rules as they go, and they only get called out when it goes wrong. It's far better to have much clearer guidelines as to what you should do and not try and pick up the pieces thereafter.
And I think one of the things we are trying to do is learn from where it's failed elsewhere and try and incorporate that.
Just okay, we're not being taxed as businesses. I think the government wants it both ways. It wants to regulate us as businesses, but then it doesn't tax us as businesses. We still don't get capital gains tax rollover relief if we sell a property and want to use the profit to buy something else. And also, no other business is taxed on their turnover, and that's what's being done to us. We're being taxed on our turnover, and it is an outrage. But you know, because there are only 2 million people and we're dispersed across the country, our votes don't particularly count with government, and that's
right. So there was a couple of questions here. Who was asking? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just as an HMO landlord, one of the most scariest things I've heard, well, two things really, is one, rent caps, but two is the 3-year tenancies, because it completely goes against the whole sector of HMOs and all the whole reason why people rent in that sector.
Okay.
You know, they want flexibility in lifestyle, and it's supposedly that's the way, you know, generation rent. That's the way people want to be. Where does 3-year tenancies work within that sector?
So it's a great question. So we're talking about HMOs. Slightly nervous about rent caps, but you're happy we kind of answered that. It's a bit
the thing is with that is it's so. I mean, you can have rent in one street and it's different in another.
Yeah,
you know,
and particularly on HMOs in London, that's very varied.
The quality of the product is as well.
Yeah. And the second question was. Hold on. Second question is. HMOs, and will 3-year tenancies apply to HMOs? That's the question.
That's I suppose the one bit of good news if they get rid of Section 21 is the question of 3-year tenancies falls, because all tenancies become open-ended, and I think that's another reason I think the government will go down this route instead of 3-year tenancies. I think you'll see open-ended tenancies through the abolition of Section 21 rather than going down the route of 3-year mandatory tenancies, because that will kill certain sectors, you know, particularly student lets, and does remove the flexibility. Open-ended tenancies leaves flexibility on the tenant side, not so much on the landlord side, obviously.
Yeah. Richard,
yes, I mean, just to say, I think the regulation on HMOs is a complete dog's breakfast. It totally needs reviewing. The related, non-related thing is ridiculous. I mean, I have a house in Newham that I can only let to families because there's an Article 4 direction, and then, you know, I get a family who moves 6 cousins in, but because they're all related, that's fine. Whereas if I'd had 3 young professionals, they probably would have just stayed there, but that's an HMO and I'm not allowed to have that. There's a total mess, and we really need to revisit it.
I have to say, I'm doing a report on this at the moment, and I'm working with John on it, and it is a nightmare. I like writing reports. I'm not enjoying this one. There's another question, sir.
I think licensing is a very good thing, but there needs some regulation to control the council. Each council charges too much. I'll tell you what's happening. Last 8 years ago, I used to pay £400 for a license. A few months in October, I got to pay nearly £1,000 to Wandsworth just to come and spend 15 minutes to walk through my house, to write me 1 letter, 2 letter, and then spend another £500 when they issue the license again to you. So about £1,500 more or less for a license.
Can I ask which borough are you?
Wandsworth.
Oh, this is Wandsworth, okay.
Through for 15 minutes, write me 2 letters and say, oh, you're satisfactory.
That's not a bad gig, is it? I think we've just uncovered a new property investment idea here. So the question is on licence fees. They should be, actually we're talking about regulating the regulators now, aren't we? So we're going to regulate the councils. And I think the highest one I'm seeing is £500 a bedroom, is that right?
Possibly. But the problem is that local authorities have huge sweeping powers on licensing. They have to do a consultation, a minimum 8-week consultation, but they don't have to take any account of what we say in the consultation. And, you know, they have to justify the scheme. And, you know, I always remember the first Waltham Forest scheme where it had to be justified on antisocial behaviour. They had a map with all the dots of the private rented sector property, a map with all the dots of antisocial behaviour, and they put them over one another and said, look, the antisocial behaviour is caused by the properties. Someone did one with a dot for every tree and said, look, the antisocial behaviour is caused by the trees. You know, I mean, I'm sorry to sound very cynical, but, you know, these powers are too sweeping. And
I think doing this report and review is that this is another case whereby we've given the what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure the tenant rents a safe and legally let property. The only way you can do that, in my view, is you visit it. And in the insurance sector, for example, they're going out, gas guys, electricians, all these guys are going out every day of the week. They're on the road already, which is the big cost. They're going into people's houses. So why can't they do it instead? What we never did was looked at who were the best people, because they don't do the parking tickets, do they? They outsource those to a company. Because if you pay councils to do this, it gets very complicated. And also, they come up with all these unbelievably ridiculous schemes, which are doing my head in at the moment. So really, there has to be, I think, and for me to not prioritise visiting a property, and certainly to pay those charges when it shouldn't cost that much, is crazy system.
I think the scary thing about licensing is despite the fact that fees are on quite a fast upward trajectory, for most councils, the fees still aren't covering the cost of the licensing. That's the really terrifying thing. You think they're taking in hundreds of thousands, in some cases tens of millions, and it's still not paying for an effective scheme.
And they're not doing enforcement. Most local authorities are not doing enforcement, which is what they should be doing.
So in actual fact, we've got a very expensive scheme, and it's not actually helping the tenants it was there for in the purpose. So I do understand that. Any other questions? Yes?
Wolverhampton, who actually introduced, I think it was Wolverhampton, introduced HMO licensing year before last, I think it was. It's actually free to get an HMO licence.
Ooh, that's all.
It's free, and it's Article 4.
That'll be Mary Latham, probably.
Oh, it will be. Yes, Mary, we all know Mary very well from their NLA, and she just tells everybody what to do.
She'll have made that happen.
Yes, yes.
So clearly needs to travel more.
We need to make a Prime Minister, probably.
Yes, yeah, I think we'd all vote for Mary as Prime Minister if you've ever met her. Any other questions anybody else has got? I'm going to choose some people that haven't spoken, if you don't mind.
I just want to find out when there's opportunity of having a tribunal like Scotland, because I'm hearing about people waiting 4 or 5 months.
Okay, so the question is about housing court. When are we going to get our own housing court?
We've had the government consultation on it. We're waiting on the government's response. To be fair, funnily enough, lawyers don't like this idea of a housing court. I can't imagine why. And actually, some of the tenant groups aren't so keen because legal aid isn't available for tribunal cases. It is for some housing cases in the courts. So we're waiting on the government's response. I think it's probably going to be quite a slow process. It's not something that's going to change overnight. It took Scotland spent 3 years putting together the evidence base, the resources and the like, and it reformed the tribunal system before it reformed the possession process. So it's not going to be a fast process. There is some entrenched opposition to it, particularly within the legal profession, they think if you simply throw more money at the courts, everything will be fine.
Okay, and there's one more quick question we can get in. Yes, sir.
I was just going to ask Airbnb, how long before the government starts to...
Oh, Airbnb. Yeah, let's go regulate Airbnb. Do you know the worst places for that is places like Edinburgh, where they've got such a huge, where you have so many visitors coming to such a small place, which has already got problems with the number of houses it has. We have been warning for some time, I think, between us now. RLA certainly did a really good report on it. But any views on Airbnb?
Well, our research actually shows that very few landlords are wanting to do short lets, because anecdotally, it feels like everyone's wanting to move into it. But only 3% of landlords say they're interested in doing short lets. So we find that fewer landlords than we expect want to do it.
Was it more about the regulation?
But it's 90 days in London, isn't it? And I think London's the only area where it's restricted in England. I don't know about Scotland and Wales. But certainly in places like Barcelona and Madrid. I mean, Madrid tried to ban Airbnb by saying that you could only Airbnb properties that had their own property at street level, which very few properties in Madrid do have. So there are some European cities that are really stamping on it.
But even at 3% of landlords looking at switching one property, that is potentially 250,000 properties being lost to residential letting. And it is quite scary in the midst of a housing crisis that you could see that many properties removed from traditional let. I think it's something the government will begin to look to address, both on the tax front as well, because at the moment it's very unregulated. It's moved away from its core principle of letting out a spare room or your own home when you're on holiday, And you're actually getting tax breaks to do it at the moment compared to the tax disincentives.
And
So-
it's just slightly weird, whereas these guys are all getting it in the neck and having to, you know, be licensed and all this, that and the other. Oh no, you can go do what you like, it's fine, we don't mind if the house blows up, it's
I'm
okay.
afraid it shows that the government doesn't really understand the business, you know, by just kind of ignoring these worrying areas, and you know, it's showing its lack of understanding.
And I think it does nail one of the lies, I think, that comes out from some of the tenant groups. They always say a house is a house is a house. It doesn't matter if it stops being a private rented property. It'll become a home for somebody. Well, actually, no. Because of the short-term letting industry, there is now an alternative that stops it being a home. And if you want to see antisocial behaviour, see some of the party house horror stories from Airbnb.
Well, I don't move in as good a circles as you, John. Right. Could you just do a big round of applause for those that kindly left for our panel? Thank you very much. Really hope you found that was useful, but it also, I think, just going through all of the changes, my word, you've got a real task on your hands. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for taking care and interest. And hopefully see you sometime in the next couple of days.